thanks so much for joining us here today, or this evening, I guess I should say, to learn a little bit more about the Winnipeg River Planning District Development Plan update. My name's Matt Gowder. I'm a community planner with a Winnipeg-based firm called Scatliff Miller Murray. I'm joined here by my colleagues, Michael Blatz, and also Raquel Higginson. I guess the first thing that I'll mention is that you may notice that the interface is a little bit different from sort of your standard Zoom meeting. We've got a large number of participants on the call today, and this is just to help us manage proceedings and also keep track of people's questions and comments. So you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. That's going to be the primary way that we engage with all of you attendees today. So as we go through our presentation, if there's any questions or comments or things you want us to speak a little bit more about, you can put those in the Q&A box. At the end of the presentation, we'll go through the questions that we've received and try to answer as many as we can. If there are any questions that we're unable to answer tonight, I'll be sharing my contact information, and we can kind of take this offline and make sure that your questions get addressed meaningfully. So I think the purpose of today, is a bit. If any of you were at the open house in Powerview Pine Falls on Saturday, it's quite similar to that event. We've got a series of slides in this case, but they're virtually identical to the presentation boards that were at that event. So we'll kind of go through the slides, myself and Michael, and then, as I said, we'll answer some questions that you receive. One thing I'll note too is that you can enter the questions in that box at any time during the presentation. Don't feel like you have to hold on to things and then maybe you'll forget or something. You can just enter those as you see things that provoke some questions. But we'll just get to it at the very end. We'll address all the questions at the end just to keep things running smoothly. So I think that's it in terms of housekeeping. And we can hop right into things. So the reason we're all here this evening is to talk about the Winnipeg River Planning District, which is a partnership between the town of Powerview Pine Falls and the RM of Alexander. This project started just over a year ago when our firm was retained by the planning district to review their district development plan. So we started this process with a background study where we examined the planning district from a variety of different angles. We looked at population, demographics, income, housing, environmental characteristics, really a wide variety of different topics were studied during that background study. And that really gave us a good sense of what was going on in both municipalities and just the overall context that we were working in. Visioning and priorities. Some of you in attendance today may have also attended our open houses that we held in the summer. There's one in St. George and one in Bird River, where we just asked members of the community, what are your priorities for community development? What matters to you? What's important to you? We also had a community survey that was circulating at the time. Some of you may have taken that. And then we also had some discussions with the board, which is of the planning district, which is comprised of members of both municipal councils. And from there, we were able to set out sort of a guiding vision and some key priorities that everyone felt should be addressed through this plan. We then got started drafting the development plan, and we have completed a first draft, which is why we're here today. Some of you may have had a chance to review the first draft, and if not, this presentation also highlights some key elements from that first draft. We have not given this first reading or anything. So we're still very much in the draft phase, which is great because right now it's super easy to make changes based on feedback we receive. So the idea with doing another round of public engagement like this is to get feedback, note any areas that should be edited or changed. We can do that, and then we sort of moved on to the final stage here in our graphic, which is the adoption process. And we can speak a little bit more about that later on in the presentation.
All right, I'll take over from Matt and chat a little bit more about what a development plan is. So development plans are long range, kind of big picture policy documents. They talk about a wide variety of issues like land use and development. That's the kind of their primary goal. But they also talk about things like natural resources and services and infrastructure. Um, I know we've heard from folks that a little bit of confusion about what a development plan is. So I should mention it's not about a specific site. You're not going to see plans for drawings of a development. It's a community-wide plan. And again, really high level, big picture. Um, and we know too that there were questions about a campground in the Broadlands, and our scope of work is not related to that campground at all. Again, this is about a plan for the entire community. Um, so back to development plans, there's something that is required by the province for all municipalities in the entire province. So your current development plan was adopted back in about 14, 15 years ago in 2010. And then there was one prior to that, which was adopted in 1992. So um, there, there, so why update the plan? The province says that they should be updated every 5 years. So based on those numbers, it's been a little longer than that. But um, the main reasons to update your plan is to reflect changes in the community. I think one big one that everyone knows probably on the call is the mill was in Powerview shut down actually after the current plan was enacted. So for all these years, the plan has said is acting like the um, mill is still there, and so this plan, and we'll get into it later, but it kind of talks about that site in a little bit more detail than most others, and kind of enables some new uses there. And then the other big reason is to update policies to match changes at the provincial level. So the province has some control over land use and development in different ways, and the development plan really should reflect those changes at the provincial level. So how is a development plan different than a zoning bylaw? You might know about zoning bylaws and how they set out kind of specific rules and regulations for development and land use, and those rules and regulations are kind of saying what is allowed on your land currently. A development plan is a little different because it's looking towards the future, and again, it's kind of a big picture document. So um, really a development plan is the overarching document, and then any changes to the zoning bylaw should kind of follow what the development plan says. And Matt touched on this, but the question about what is a planning district. So it's kind of it's made up of two or more municipalities, and they're managed by a board, and the board is made up of councillors from each municipality. And and in your case, it's called the Winnipeg River Planning District, um, and it enforces the district-wide development plan. And then each of the member municipalities, so the town of Powerview Pine Falls and the arm of Alexander, then each have a zoning bylaw which should kind of follow what the development plan says. So how does the development plan shape your community? It- It's kind of in lots of different ways, and it's again big picture stuff. So it talks about protecting agricultural lands and natural resources. It talks about protecting lakes, rivers, and natural areas from degradation. Um, it talks about keeping appropriate distances between livestock operations and homes, designating new areas for homes and cottages, but at the same time limiting sprawl so that everything can have efficient services, preventing development close to dangerous and unsafe locations, and creating new opportunities for businesses and industry. And then also talking about ensuring that residents have access to parks and green spaces. And this plan in particular, the draft plan has some mention of removing development moratoriums along the Lee and Bird rivers.
Um, so I mentioned that as the second stage of our process was this visioning exercise, and the vision for this plan is really about balance. I think balancing the interests of seasonal residents, of year-round residents, of tourists, the balancing as well, opportunities for economic development with making sure that important natural areas and ecosystems are protected. So the vision that we came up with in a collaborative way was comprised of the town of Parview Pine Falls and the Arm of Alexander. The Winnipeg River Planning District features beautiful natural landscapes, popular seasonal destinations, and well-established communities. Building on the legacy of major industry and natural resource development, the district will chart a new course for the future that leverages its existing strengths to develop its communities in a balanced and responsible way. The district's year-round settlement shall provide housing for all, a variety of services and amenities, and expanding opportunities for employment. New seasonal development shall allow future generations to enjoy the district's lakes and rivers without compromising the health of these ecosystems. The Arm of Alexander and Town of Parview Pine Falls will continue to collaborate to create an attractive destination for tourists and a welcoming place to call home.
All right, so coming out of the draft vision, we have draft principles. So these are kind of aspirations for the community, and I'll read them off for you now. So we have provide high quality infrastructure services and utilities. So this helps support development throughout the district, promoting opportunities for economic development. So definitely want to encourage compatible commercial and industrial development, again, in appropriate locations all over the planning district. Protect natural assets and resources. So we know the rivers and the forested areas and agricultural lands are all really important to the character of the planning district, and definitely want to protect those. Growing recreational offerings, that's both for residents and for visitors to, and again, that ties back to more economic opportunities and those natural assets. Cultivating partnerships and embracing collaboration. So obviously by nature, the planning district is a collaboration, but there's also opportunities to have partnerships with neighboring municipalities, with First Nations such as Broken Hill and Saging, and then also with higher levels of government. The last four are expand tourism. So we talked about this a little already, but bolster the identity of the district by supporting more public-facing attractions and services that might attract more folks and bring more money into the area. Leverage existing strengths. So something like the former mill site might be seen as a weakness, but we see it as an opportunity to get more economic development and more stability in the area. Build healthy, safe, and age-friendly communities. This has to do with just everyday life so to support access to essential services and public amenities. Most of these will be located in what we're calling development centers. We'll kind of get to that later about what those are, but those are those major kind of communities where you'd have more services. And then lastly, preserve and enhance agriculture. So making sure that where agriculture is viable and happening, that family farms and that kind of prime land is protected from incompatible development. I'll hand it back to Matt.
Thanks, Michael. When we do a development plan review, it sounds like maybe there's a lot of change happening, but in reality, whenever we do one of these reviews across the province, the changes are usually pretty. I don't know if I would say minor, but in the most of the plan, the bulk of the plan often stays pretty similar to the last one. It's really about tweaking, fine tuning, addressing key specific areas that need attention. That's why the project is called a development plan update or development plan review rather than maybe a development plan rewrite. For this project, there's 3 key changes that we wanted to highlight and discuss further with you today. The first is land redesignation. So perhaps you're familiar. If you're not, development plans are kind of comprised of 2 parts, policies and maps. The policies are about giving council and the board guidance as they administer land use day to day in the district. And basically it provides the board and the member municipalities with criteria and support as they make decisions about development applications and different kinds of development. The maps, on the other hand, designate certain areas in the district for certain kinds of development. So, for example, if someone is looking to establish a new business within the district, they would look at this development plan and see where are the areas that are designated for commercial growth. And they would know that that kind of development that they're pursuing would be supported in those areas. So as part of this process, we undertook a process where we looked at redesignating some land in some key strategic locations. Some of this meant lands next to existing cottage communities being opened up for some more residential development. And on the other hand, some places which were currently designated for residential growth were being considered for redesignation that would keep them in their natural state to prevent sprawl, to make servicing more efficient, and to protect sensitive ecological areas and even just green spaces that are valued by the community. The second key change has to do with the mill site, the redevelopment of the Powerview Pine Falls mill site. And so currently, the mill site is designated for industrial development. So that means that the scope of possible uses for that site is quite narrow. And in talking with the board, but also the owner of the property and also other stakeholders, we saw that there was a desire to maybe look at some opportunities beyond industrial for that site. So maybe some smaller scale commercial. There's some discussion of the possibility of subdividing the site, so splitting it up into multiple pieces of land instead of one big piece, and then kind of establishing a variety of commercial uses intermixed with industrial uses on that site. And we saw this as an opportunity for economic development. And so we created a new designation under the development plan in our draft called employment. And that hopefully should, assuming this everything goes according to plan, will open up that property for more opportunities, and hopefully bring more jobs to the community, and encourage the redevelopment of that major piece of vacant land. The third key change we consider, and Michael touched on this, and we'll touch on this actually further on in the presentation when we get to the maps, is the possible lifting of moratoriums, subdivision moratoriums on the Bird and Lee rivers, and instead using the land designations to kind of achieve that same effect, but with a little bit more flexibility. So I'm sure many people on the call are aware that as of right now, and this is still the case, that there's a subdivision moratorium along the Lee and Bird rivers that stems from a recreational capacity study that was done on boat traffic on these waterways. And the thinking at the time was because it was found that there was too much boat traffic, there were safety issues, erosion issues. The thinking was that if we limit new development along these rivers, then that will help to control some of this boat traffic. Unfortunately, what's been found since then is that the moratoriums have not had the desired effect. And a big part of this is because, of course, people from other communities and other places can come and drive their boats in these areas. And so we're still seeing these increases in boat traffic. And so we had discussions with the not only the board but also the provincial government, who's kind of responsible in part for implementing these moratoriums. And it was determined sort of that the moratorium is not serving its purpose. One thing that the municipality is doing to kind of control the boat traffic is the implementation of VORR regulations that will regulate boats rather than properties. And they're hopeful that this will be a more effective way of addressing some of those concerns about the boating. At the same time, if the moratorium is not accomplishing if it's not an effective tool, if it's not accomplishing its goals, and it's restricting what people are able to do with their land, we felt it was something that maybe we could revisit and reconsider. And so as we move on to the maps, I'll kind of show you how we use land designations to still control development along the river, but with that flexibility for possible subdivisions in certain cases. And just to note, of course, that the plan is still in draft form, so nothing has been adopted, nothing has been passed. Your old development plan is still in effect, but these are the key changes that we're really contemplating within this draft that we're sharing. So now we can get into the proposed development plan maps. This map, of course, you're not going to be able to read it. It's the entire planning district, but I just wanted to give you this big context first and show you the land designations in at play here. So our first designation is agricultural area. So the intent of this designation is to protect the agricultural capacity of the district, support the rural economy, and limited opportunities for rural living. We also have the natural resource area, which is what most of the land in the district falls under. So the natural resource protects and enhances undeveloped rural lands for ecological, economic, and recreational benefits. So natural resource doesn't mean no development. It just means less intensive development, really. So there's plenty of agricultural lands, for example, in the district that are currently designated as natural resource, and that is going to be able to continue. And we'll show a little bit more about how that works as we move through some of these more detailed maps. Next, we have the urban residential area that accommodates various forms of residential development, as well as other complementary uses. That's a designation you'll find in Powerview Pine Falls, which is a more urban context. On the other hand, the cottage and rural residential areas are within the RM, and these are meant to sustainably manage new cottage and rural growth while also protecting the unique character of existing cottage settlements. Employment area, that's that new designation that we talked about that's being applied to the former mill site. This establishes central locations that accommodate a variety of small-scale commercial uses, but also provide appropriate locations for mid to large-scale commercial uses and industrial uses. On the other hand, the rural commercial area, which is where you'll find sort of more industrial uses in the RM, establishes appropriate locations for intensive commercial and industrial uses in rural areas. The Winnipeg River corridor area is kind of an interesting one. It kind of relates to the uses, the land uses that kind of sprung up along the Winnipeg River before we had as formal land use planning. And basically there's a mix of land uses along the river, a mix of residential, agricultural, commercial, even light industrial in some cases. And so this Winnipeg River corridor area designation is something that was found in the 2010 plan. It's something we just carried over to support the mix of land uses which have currently developed over time along the west bank of the Winnipeg River. while also making sure there's appropriate guidelines in place to prevent severe land use conflicts. Community area is sort of a general development area, we might call it. This is what you'll find applied to St. George and Great Falls. Communities which are, where you have a clustering of population, but maybe aren't at the size yet where you need to split off specific areas for commercial, specific areas for residential, specific areas for institutional. So it's kind of a more general designation that supports a variety of uses designed to support the residents. And then our last designation is parks, open space, and institutional. That ensures residents can access a range of green spaces, community institutions, and recreational facilities. So now we'll go through a few maps that are more detailed, sort of zoomed in. If you don't see your property on one of these maps, that basically means that nothing is changing between the 2010 plan and the current plan. As we said, when we do a development plan review, most lands do not get redesignated. Most lands retain their exact same designation. And even on the zoomed in maps, most of the properties are staying the same. It's really just in a few key areas where we're proposing some redesignations. We're just going to show you what that's going to look like. So basically, I'm going to show you a marked up map like this, and then in the next slide, I'll show you sort of a clean version. So for the East Beaches, one change we made is removing Birch Landing from the development plan. First Nations lands are not governed by the Planning Act in the development plan in this way, and they're kind of separate. So we've grayed that out, as you can see. Other changes here, there's in some cases, we're redesignating from residential to natural resource to promote effective and efficient development patterns. So you see that green hatching over yellow, that's what's going on there. On the other hand, in and around Bel Air, we're proposing to redesignate from natural resource to residential to enable more development there. We've also squared off a rural commercial designation to address some properties that had a split designation that was just making it confusing for development. And then that is what that would look like when it's all cleaned up. In the Bear Paw area, we've proposed a slight redesignation from residential to commercial to reflect ongoing land use that's already happening. At the same time, we've proposed that little island of a natural resource surrounded by a sea of residential just goes into residential to ensure that land use is contiguous and compatible. Well, on the other hand, on the outskirts of the Bear Paw area, we've proposed redesignating two parcels from residential into natural resource. In the community of the community of Stead, there's a small redesignation proposed from rural to community based on some direction we got from the province and some interest from a landowner. In the Powerview Pine Falls area, you can see that we've folded in the mill site and the Main Street into this comprehensive employment area designation. And then in the plan, we have specific policies that set out a little more detail for each of these areas. So within the employment area designation, we have some we have some general policies, we have some Main Street policies, and we have some mill site policies. And that's how we kind of split that all out. We've also proposed in the RM to redesignate some areas from rural commercial to natural resource to promote efficient development patterns. And then in and around St. George, there's a small extension of the community area to delineate areas for future community growth. And that's what that looks like cleaned up. I should have noted actually that you'll see around some communities we have this dotted line that denotes a development center where more urban style growth is encouraged. And we have specific policies in the plan that sort of direct major community amenities, services, institutional uses to development centers, just to make sure that they're being located where people can access them easily. These are the Bird River maps. And this is going to illustrate sort of how we're proposing to transition away from subdivision moratoriums to regulating and controlling development through land use designation. And this is an approach that, you know, is really supported by the province. The provincial government is not, you know, they don't feel that the development moratoriums are serving their intended purpose, and they really encourage us to go in kind of this direction. So the green is the natural resource area, and obviously the yellow is the cottage and rural residential area proposed. Within the policies of the natural resource area, generally it's much more difficult to subdivide, although single lot subdivisions are permitted at the discretion of the board. And then in the cottage and rural residential area, it's easier to do a multi-lot subdivision. So what we're proposing through these redesignations is to take some land in the Bird River area that is currently designated as residential and put it back into natural resource. And then in some other parcels, we're proposing the opposite, where natural resource is turned into residential. It's a net gain in terms of natural resource. More land is going into natural resource than land going into residential. The idea is that those who have land that is designated as residential, you know, will be able to pursue possibly a subdivision, although it's certainly not, you know, guaranteed. Those whose land is natural resource or goes into natural resource, that is how we kind of remove some of those abilities to subdivide along, you know, in this area. That's not to say that they can't apply for a redesignation for their lands. They certainly would be able to, but again, that would be at the discretion of the board. And so that's kind of how we're proposing to move forward in the Bird River area. And that's how that would look. And just to note that, remember that anything without the hatching that you see, those diagonal lines, that's no change. That's what's in place currently, and that's what we're proposing will continue to remain.
All right. So we're nearly to the end, and I know there's lots of questions, so I'll try to speed through the next couple slides. So there's time to answer all those questions. But big question is, how will the development plan be implemented? So again, the development plan provides a vision for the future, and the planning district and the municipalities have a few tools and different ways to implement the plan. The biggest one, and it really are the municipal zoning bylaws. So the zoning bylaws should be updated to reflect the changes made here with whatever version of the plan is adopted. But it's also something that guides private development when if you have a piece of land, let's say on all those maps that Matt was just showing, it's yellow, it's that rural and cottage residential, and maybe your land is currently zoned for agriculture, but you want to do that residential type of development, you would apply for rezoning from agriculture to a residential zone, and the board would then look, oh, does this proposal match what the development plan says should be there in the future? And in that case, it does, and so then that really strengthens your application. Next, I'll talk about legal non-conforming uses. So a big question that we often get is, okay, you know, the color of my property changed. What does that mean for me? And the short answer is anything that you're doing right now that's legal and was lawfully established can continue to happen. So if you have, again, if you have a house and it was built legally, No one's going to make you change that. But if you were to, build a new business in a or try to build a new business in a residential area, that might not be allowed. So it's going to be a little different for each property, but in short, if the use was established legally under the current rules or under previous rules even, then it's allowed to continue. Next, subdivision control. So again, new proposals will be evaluated against the development plan, and that's kind of checked at both the provincial and the municipal levels. Capital expenditures and public works. So as the RM and town invest in new services or upgrades to existing infrastructure, those investments really should align with the policies laid out in this plan, and this plan also helps them decide where to put new infrastructure by indicating where new growth will happen. And then lastly is kind of the buying and selling of land at the municipal level. So one tool that we've seen really effectively is when municipalities want a specific site to develop a certain way, they can buy it, or if they already own it, they can sell it to a developer to kind of implement what's happening or what they've identified in the plan. All right. So in terms of overall process, the next steps, as Matt mentioned, we had a big turnout on Saturday at our in-person event, and we have quite a few folks here too. So we're gonna kind of review all the comments and questions that we receive tonight and from Saturday, and edit the draft plan as needed, and then provide a final version of it to the planning district board. Once the board has that, then they can give it first reading. So that kind of begins the formal adoption process. Once the first reading is done, then a mandatory public hearing will be held, and that's the last chance for the public to provide feedback. So after the public hearing, assuming there's no major alterations that are required, the board can give the bylaw second reading. And after second reading, then it goes to the province for ministerial approval. And then finally, it comes back to the board, who can adopt it officially. So now we'll pivot to a Q&A session. As Matt mentioned earlier, there's the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. I think we already have quite a few questions in there, and we can start answering those.
Yeah, and I would just, we are getting a lot of questions. There's a good chance that we might not be able to get to everyone's questions tonight. So I'll be sharing my contact information as well at the end of the meeting, and you can always email me if you don't get quite the answer that you're looking for. I'm seeing a question here. Did the consultants contact the owner/developer of the old mill site to collaborate? Yeah, we did. So we had a couple phone calls with them. We also had them down to our office here for a more in-depth chat, and then they touched base with us in advance of this set of open houses. Well, they weren't able to make it tonight or on Saturday. They were pleased with the direction we were taking things in, and so it was a really positive collaboration. And I did see another question that kind of ties into that. This question is, what incentives do you recommend the planning district offer to developers? I think one of the things that we wanted to do with this treatment of the former mill site is to create more incentives, right? And to create more opportunities, right? Because obviously you don't want to be giving the house away necessarily, but supportive land use designations can in certain cases remove like a big first hurdle that someone bringing jobs to the area would have to jump through. And it signals the intent of the planning district to promote economic development. So I've even, in discussions with the mayor of Powder View Pine Falls, that he noted that this redesignation may make it easier for the owner of the mill site to get financing and financial support for a redevelopment project. So this is an example of an incentive that isn't, it's not giving away cash. It's not, saying no rules here, do whatever you want. But it's, it's a sign that, the district is forward thinking. They're open to a variety of opportunities, and they want to support economic growth and economic development and commercial and industrial development in areas that really make sense.
I'll maybe jump in. There's a question about where we got certain demographic and income information. So that we really rely on Statistics Canada for. I know there was a question from the mayor of Powerview about the population numbers given there, and he was actually able to help us find some more up-to-date population numbers from one of the economic development organizations in the area too. So we try to rely on those kind of big official places for that sort of data.
There's a question I wanted to answer here. I think I did disappear here. Oh, what does promote efficient development patterns mean? So basically, an interesting characteristic of the planning district is that there's a lot of residential land that is designated that is not developed. And so what we want to do is to avoid sort of sprawling development, because it's not really cost effective, right? If the municipality is having to maintain roads, is having to, potentially, provide municipal services, specifically the RM here, we're talking about development that's contiguous, that's more compact, is much more cost effective and easier to manage from a municipal perspective. It also has less impact on sort of the natural environment. When we did our first set of community consultations in the summer, there were a lot of people who said that something that they really, really value about living in the district is the natural beauty, the access to these undeveloped areas, we wanted to respect that. And so making sure that new residential development doesn't take up more room than it needs to was a priority for us. So that's kind of what that means.
Matt, I'm wondering if you can chat a little bit more about the moratorium. I see some questions about that, and I think you're the old pro on that one.
Sure. I'll try to kind of summarize here. I see one person asking who decides whether the moratorium is lifted. So as I mentioned, the review of the moratorium, it came from the province as well as the board. And although the board has the final approval on the plan, the province gets to comment on the plan as well, and the province can object to certain things in the plan and stop it from going forward. And so I wouldn't say it's one or the other. I think either authority has a role to play in reviewing the moratoriums. So I don't know. It's not like a black and white answer necessarily. I'm just going to scroll through some of the other questions here. There was a question, I can't see it now, but I thought this was an interesting question, asking why would someone want to redesignate from residential to natural resource? And that's a really good question. For example, if they own sort of an undeveloped piece of property and they have no intentions of subdividing it, and it's designated as residential, but maybe they would like to establish sort of a specialized agricultural operation, so maybe like an apiary, so putting up beehives, or some sort of small scale, like a Christmas tree farm, that sort of thing. If they wanted to have a use that was maybe a little bit more tourism focused, maybe some, I don't know, some glamping or something like that, then a natural resource designation would be a lot more suitable for those kind of uses. So that is a reason why someone would choose to redesignate from residential to natural resource. One thing I want to really stress, I'm seeing a lot of questions talking about zoning. And we did mention this in the presentation, but maybe some people missed it, that development plan designations are not the same as zoning. So even when this development plan is adopted, the zoning of your property will not change. Zoning is a regulatory tool that clearly lays out what is allowed and what is not allowed on your property. It also sets development standards like setbacks, building heights, that sort of thing. The development plan designations are really like forward thinking. It's like in 20 years, where do we want to, how do we see this area developing over time? Where zoning and the development plan kind of interface is if you're going to apply to rezone your property. So you want to change the zoning of your property. One of the critical tests for a rezoning application is whether or not that rezoning complies with the development plan. So if your property is zoned as residential and you want to rezone to commercial, let's say, but you're not within a commercial area in the development plan, that means that your rezoning application would likely be denied. Now, when the RM or town redoes their zoning bylaw, it has to be in line with the development plan. So that's the other way it interfaces. When it comes time to review your zoning bylaw, the development plan gives the municipalities guidance about what things in the zoning bylaw should be changed. But I just want to make sure that everyone understands that development plan designations and zoning are not the same thing. I also wanted to note that we had some questions about whether development plan designations are the same thing as property tax assessment classes. No, those are two independent systems. If your piece of property changes development plan designation, that does not affect how your property is assessed from a taxation perspective. Because again, when it comes to property taxes, assessment is looking at what is on the site right now, not what it could be in the future. I'm just going to see if there's any more. Are the maps of the changes on the Bird River available? Yeah, I believe on the RM website and RM Facebook page, and also the town shared a copy of the draft plan. If you scroll to the bottom, the very last pages, the maps are available there.
And Raquel just shared a link to the draft development plan document, the full document, in the chat with everybody, so you can check it out there as well.
I just want to see some more questions. How do we get a copy? Yeah, so in the chat. I see someone asking about a proposed subdivision in Bird River. So development plan designation does not mean proposed subdivision. What any change in development plan designation means is that it's signaling the intent for future land use. So a property anywhere could be really designated as residential, but unless it's up to the private landowner or landowners to pursue any sort of planning approvals and development on that site. So there's no lots proposed or anything like that, any subdivision at this time. I see a question here asking who are the members of the Planning District Board. There are 2 members from the town of Powerview Pine Falls and 3 from the RM of Alexander, and these are members of council, so they're elected officials.
I was going to answer. I saw a question about building in dangerous locations and what determines and classifies that. So I think that's probably related to something I kind of talked about near the beginning. So the kind of dangerous locations, it can be kind of a natural hazard or a man-made hazard. So something natural might be, you know, a place that's known to have erosion, or maybe it has steep slopes and there's some instability there. And that's often determined by a geotechnical engineer. And then man-made hazards might be, you know, some sort of industry with, you know, a quarry is dangerous to a certain extent with blasting and that sort of thing. Um, or an industry that uses a lot of chemicals, and so it's usually on a case by case basis as to what is dangerous, and kind of what sort of provisions would be in place to prevent development nearby, and what sort of development could be nearby, and kind of the distances between things. So it ends up being a bit of a case by case basis, but the development plan does have some kind of guiding principles for how to make those decisions.
I see a question here about what does it mean that rural areas change to agricultural area? It's a name change. That's it. You know, we just felt it reflected the land use that was going on there, especially because we have other rural, we have like rural commercial area, rural residential, and cottage area. We just found it a little bit confusing, so it's just a name change, and that's all. Looking at the questions here, and sorry, we've got some construction that's happening in the building, so apologies if you can hear any loud banging.
I see a question about if the plan would pass, when would final reading take place, more or less. I'm thinking it's going to be spring, summer, depending on how things go.
I see a question here about what is municipally owned land. So that is land owned by either the RM of Alexander or the town of Powerview Pine Falls. See here. Looking. Some people are asking very specific questions about specific parcels. I'm going to drop my email in the chat right now because it's hard for me to know exactly which properties you're referring to. But if you send me an email, mgowdar@scatlift.ca, I can maybe answer some of those more particular questions. Where can we get a copy of what is proposed? Yeah, so we've shared that draft in the chat. It's available on the municipal websites. Yeah, just again, seeing some questions about proposed subdivisions. Again, there's no subdivision that is happening as part of the development plan. A subdivision is something that's initiated by a private landowner. The development plan, what it can do is provide guidance to the board and the member municipalities about whether a subdivision should be approved or not. Oh, I see a question. What is included in cottage and rural residential? What is allowed to be built in those areas? So that's primarily single unit dwellings and cottage style development is the primary land use. So you probably wouldn't see like many services and amenities in these in those areas. What you'll see is that in sort of cottage areas adjacent to them, or maybe in a more central location or a location on a highway, you might see a little rural commercial cluster, and that's where you would see sort of maybe a corner store or a gas station or something like that. But in terms of what is envisioned for rural residential cottage areas, it's essentially single unit dwellings, and maybe, for example, like a community park or something, but not too much beyond that.
I had one question about some people were asking about whether this plan would do anything garden sizes and fence heights and those sorts of things, and the answer to that is no. Again, this plan is kind of a big picture document and kind of forward looking, and so those a fence height might be regulated in a zoning bylaw. Usually, no one cares how big your garden is. So really particular things like that are dealt with, if anywhere, in the zoning bylaw, but definitely not in this sort of development plan. Matt, I don't know how much longer we want to.
We can keep going a little
Yeah, okay.
longer.
Yeah,
I'm
I
fine
know
with that.
people's time is valuable, but
We'll maybe go for another 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
I see a question about stakeholder engagement. Does your background study include consultations with community stakeholders outside your sphere of influence? If you mean sort of people outside the world of planning, then yes, absolutely. We had our public survey, which was live, and we received, I think, several hundred responses to that. This was about a year ago, so that was great. To hear from people from all over the district in both Powerview, Pine Falls, and the Arm of Alexander, all the different parts. We had our community open houses where residents, came down and chatted with us, and we had people who were cottage owners, who were seasonal residents. We had permanent residents, and then again, we also did a few targeted stakeholder interviews. When we had our conversations with the owner of the former mill site, that was one such case. But we also talked to some local tourism organizations, and stakeholders like that, to try and get a sense of different priorities. So yeah, we tried to consult as far and wide as we could. Obviously, we're never going to be able to get to everyone, but we tried our absolute best to make sure that we contacted a wide variety of interested parties.
I saw some questions about whether some of the redesignations, kind of the swapping between natural resource and residential, were crown land or private owner. Matt, I'm thinking most of them were, if not all, were private owners. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I believe so.
Okay.
I see. Oh, go ahead.
Well, and the RM sent letters out to folks who were affected, right?
Yeah. So letters were sent to any potentially affected landowners from these changes. If you are one of those landowners and you didn't receive the letter, they did happen around the same time as the Canada Post strike. So if you didn't get one and you have more questions about what redesignation means, please give me an email. And I've had a lot of conversations with potentially affected landowners, and I think that everyone who I've talked to has come away with like a better understanding and has been able to have their questions answered in a meaningful way. I saw a question about Trans-Canada Trail access. Yes, it has been considered. There are some policies in the development plan about access to the Trans-Canada Trail, and sort of, trails are a good, a part of economic development, and a good trail can help bring people into your community. So yeah, we have considered that, and good question. Can all that registered for this session receive a copy of all questions and answers? Can we also receive a recording of the session? Unfortunately, the session is not being recorded, so I'm not sure that we can do that for you. And I think we'll have to, discuss with the board about whether we want to send a copy of all the questions and answers. Just because there may be some privacy issues to consider there. I'm not sure if everyone who signed up for this, thought they would be broadcasting their first and last name out to everybody. So uncertain on that one, unfortunately. But I can certainly ask, and perhaps maybe we can make something available to everyone who registered to attend the event. That might be an option. That's a little bit of a wait and see. looking here.